Hello everyone. In today's video, we're going to talk about disturbing accounts from homeless people. Let's get into the video. The supermarket parking lot was almost empty when Richard finished shopping. 10 o'clock on a Thursday night, and only a few scattered cars occupied the vast space, illuminated by flickering fluorescent lights. As he was putting the bags in the trunk, he noticed the man, standing a few meters away, watching him with an unsettling intensity. Worn-out clothes, unshaven beard, a gray beanie pulled down over his eyes. Richard slammed the trunk shut with unnecessary force and quickly got into the car. Through the rear-view mirror, he saw the man move, walking in the opposite direction. Richard breathed a sigh of relief, started the engine, and left the parking lot. Just normal urban paranoia, he thought. Nothing to worry about. On the 10-minute drive to his suburban home, Richard forgot about the incident. The quiet neighborhood where he had lived for 5 years with Sarah and little Emma, 6 years old, always gave him a sense of security that the city center never could. However, as he turned onto his street, an inexplicable unease crept over him. He slowed down and examined the houses around him. Some had their lights on, others were dark, depending on their occupants' bedtime. Nothing out of the ordinary. He parked in the garage and carried the groceries inside, where Sarah was watching a cooking show on TV. "Is Emma already asleep?" he asked, placing the bags on the kitchen counter. Sarah nodded. "An hour ago. Long day at school." Richard told her about the man in the parking lot, downplaying the discomfort he had felt. Sarah listened as they put away the groceries together. "He was probably just waiting for someone," she concluded. Around midnight, they went up to their bedroom. Richard checked the locks on the front and back doors, a ritual he performed every night, and activated the basic alarm system they had, installed the previous year after a wave of break-ins in the neighboring area. Sleep came easily, but it didn't last. Richard woke up disoriented. The room was completely dark except for the faint glow of the digital clock. 3:17 a.m. Something had woken him, but he couldn't identify what. He remained still, sharpening his hearing. A faint creak in the hallway. Sarah was sleeping soundly beside him. Careful not to wake her, Richard sat up in bed. It could be nothing. The old house often made noises at night as the wood expanded and contracted. But something in his instincts warned him. Another creak, closer to the bedroom door. Richard was about to get up when the door slowly swung open. A dark silhouette filled the doorway. There was no time to react. In one fluid motion, the intruder crossed the room and pressed something cold and sharp against Richard's throat. "Not a sound," a rough voice whispered, "or I'll slit your throat before you can scream." The smell of sweat and alcohol filled his nostrils. Richard recognized the gray beanie even in the dim light. It was the man from the parking lot. He had followed him. He had been waiting. Sarah stirred, gradually waking up. When her eyes opened and focused on the scene, the intruder already had the knife firmly pressed against Richard's neck. "Where's the money?" the man demanded. "I know you have it. I saw you at the ATM before the supermarket." Richard tried to speak, but the pressure of the blade increased, forcing him to swallow his words. A thin, warm trickle of blood ran down his neck. "In the office," Sarah replied, her voice trembling but controlled. "First drawer of the desk. $200. The man grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. "Go get it and don't even think about calling the cops." Sarah slid out of bed, her eyes never leaving Richard's. There was something in her gaze, a silent code developed over 15 years of marriage. Richard understood immediately. The gun. In the same drawer as the money, Sarah left the room. The man kept the knife steady, but his attention was divided, his eyes following Sarah's movements down the hallway. "Why did you choose us?" Richard asked, trying to distract the intruder. "Shut up," the man growled. "I saw your car, your nice neighborhood. People like you always have something to take." A noise in the hallway, something falling to the floor. The man instinctively turned his head. It was enough. Richard grabbed the wrist holding the knife, twisting it with all the strength he could muster. The blade sliced his arm as they struggled, but adrenaline blocked the pain. The intruder was stronger than he looked. With a violent motion, he threw Richard against the wall. The bedside lamp fell and shattered. In the near-total darkness, Richard felt the first blow hit his stomach, knocking the air from his lungs. The second punch landed on his face. Blood filled his mouth as he slid to the floor. The third and fourth blows came in quick succession: ribs, jaw. Richard's consciousness wavered. The sound of footsteps running down the hallway. Sarah had returned. A deafening gunshot filled the room. The shot missed, hitting the wall. In a swift movement, the intruder lunged at Sarah, knocking the gun from her hands. The pistol slid across the wooden floor. "Mommy?" Emma's sleepy voice came from the hallway. Everyone froze. "Go back to your room, sweetheart," Sarah shouted, the desperation clear in her voice. Too late. Emma appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with terror as she took in the scene. Her father bleeding on the floor, her mother struggling with a stranger, the gun lying in the corner of the room. "Come here, princess," the intruder called, his voice suddenly soft, almost gentle. "Come with uncle." When Emma hesitated, paralyzed with fear, the man acted. In 2 quick steps, he grabbed her by the arm. Emma screamed, a sharp cry of pure terror. The man pressed the knife against her small neck. "Now," he said, his voice hard again. "Let's get that money. And maybe I'll let the little girl live." What happened next took only seconds, but for Richard, it felt like an eternity in slow motion. Sarah lunged at the intruder. Emma screamed again. The man stumbled back, dragging the girl with him toward the stairs. Richard, summoning strength he didn't know he had, crawled toward the fallen gun. At the top of the stairs, Sarah managed to grab Emma, yanking her out of the man's grasp. The intruder, off balance, stumbled over the first step. Richard reached the gun. The fall was quick and brutal. The intruder's body tumbled clumsily down the stairs, ending with a sickening thud as his head struck the marble floor of the entryway. In the silence that followed, only the family's ragged breathing filled the air. Richard, staggering too, the staircase saw the man weakly moving below, still alive, still a threat. As the intruder began to rise, the cold metal in Richard's hands suddenly felt like it weighed a ton. The second gunshot echoed through the house, deafening in its finality. 6 months later, the Henderson family was still struggling to regain some sense of normalcy. Therapy helped, but the scars, physical on Richard, emotional on all of them, ran deep. The house now had a state-of-the-art security system. Cameras, motion sensors, automatic lights. Richard had also installed an extra lock on Emma's bedroom door, controlled only from the inside. Despite all the physical precautions, what had changed most was the look in their eyes. That fundamental trust in the world, the belief in safety. Within their own home, those certainties had been violently ripped away that night. The intruder, they later discovered, was a man named Marcus Wells, a former veteran with a history of untreated mental illness and substance abuse. Just another statistic, another tragedy in a broken system. For the Henderson family, however, he would forever be the intruder who turned their home, once a sanctuary, into a battleground where they were forced to fight desperately for the right to keep living. Did you like the first story? Comment on which part impacted you the most. Let's move on to the second story. The music was still pounding in my ears as I walked away from Tyler's house. 3 in the morning on a Saturday, and the party was still going strong, but I had reached my limit. The icy November air hit me like a slap. A drastic change from the stuffy and chaotic atmosphere I had just left behind. I adjusted my scarf and began the 20-minute walk to my apartment. The streets were deserted, except for a few passing cars and the distant sound of sirens, the usual soundtrack of the city even at this hour. It was at the corner of Elm and 7th Avenue that I saw him, a man sitting on the sidewalk leaning against the brick wall of a closed shop. Disheveled gray hair and unshaven beard, a worn-out coat that seemed inadequate for the increasingly bitter cold. Our eyes met as I approached. "Hey, buddy," he called out, his voice surprisingly clear and articulate. "Got a minute?" Normally I would have kept walking, but something in his voice made me stop. Maybe it was the alcohol still circulating in my system, maybe just the loneliness of the night. "Depends on what you need," I replied, keeping a safe distance. He smiled, revealing teeth that were surprisingly well maintained for someone in his situation. I'm Lewis. I don't need money if that's what you're thinking. I'm just hungry, haven't eaten since yesterday. I hesitated. There was a 24-hour diner just a block away. I can buy you a sandwich, I offered. Lewis's smile widened. You're a good guy, Daniel. I froze. How do you know my name? Lewis pointed at my chest. I looked down and saw the party badge still hanging from my jacket. Daniel Bennett, Electrical Engineering, it read in large letters. Oh, I muttered, feeling stupid for my moment of paranoia. Let's go then. At the diner, only a sleepy employee was there to serve us. I ordered a burger combo, fries, and coffee for Lewis, who devoured the food with silent gratitude. As he ate, I began to relax. He was just a guy down on his luck, after all. So, engineering student, Lewis commented between bites. At State University, right? Is Professor Harrington still a nightmare in the third year? Once again, that uneasy feeling. How do you know that? Lewis shrugged. Intuition. And you look like a state student. As for Harrington, let's just say I had my glory days on campus. Something didn't add up, but I couldn't pinpoint what. As Lewis finished his coffee, I noticed thin scars on his wrists, partially hidden by the sleeves of his coat. Did you live around here? I asked, trying to sound casual. I've lived everywhere and nowhere, he replied, his eyes suddenly distant. You know what's funny, Daniel? How life changes in an instant. One day you're preparing lessons, the next, you were a teacher? The surprise in my voice was obvious. Lewis didn't answer directly. Instead, he locked eyes with me. Can I ask you a favor? I need money for the shelter on 15th. It's $20 a night. The request made me uncomfortable. I had already bought him food, and the mention of money contradicted his initial approach. I thought you said you didn't need money, I said cautiously. And I didn't for food. His tone shifted subtly. But it's getting colder. The shelter has heating. Sorry, but I don't carry cash, I lied. I had exactly $60 in my wallet saved for the weekend. Lewis's expression changed. The grateful man disappeared, replaced by something more calculating. Don't lie to me, Daniel Bennett, apartment 3B in the green building on Oakwood Street. My blood ran cold. How do you... Your address is on the back of your badge in case of emergency, he explained. But there was something else in his eyes now. And I saw you check your wallet earlier. I saw the bills. I abruptly stood up. I need to go. Lewis grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. $50, Daniel. It's nothing to you, but to me. His voice carried an emotion I couldn't identify. Anger. Desperation. Let me go, I demanded, pulling my arm away. The diner employee finally seemed to notice the tension. Is there a problem here? Lewis let me go, but his eyes stayed locked on mine. You have no idea, do you? What it's like to be invisible. What it's like to scream and have no one hear you. I'm sorry about your situation, I said, stepping back, but I can't help you any further. Out on the street, I walked quickly, glancing over my shoulder. I didn't see Lewis following me, but the uneasy feeling remained. 2 blocks later, I heard footsteps behind me. Before I could react, something struck my head. I woke up to the sound of birds. I was sprawled on the ground in an alley, my head throbbing. The sun was beginning to rise. I frantically patted my pockets. My wallet was gone, as was my phone. Strangely, my watch was still on my wrist, and my keys remained in the inner pocket of my coat. At the police station, the officer barely hid his boredom as he filled out the report. Do you have any idea who did this? I hesitated. A man named Lewis. Can you describe him? I gave the details I could remember. The officer typed some information into the computer. Lewis Grayson? He asked, turning the screen toward me. The photo showed a cleaner, more sober version of the man I had met. Yes, that's him. How did you find him so quickly? The officer sighed. Former physics professor at State. Had a breakdown after his wife and daughter died in an accident 5 years ago. troubled, but usually not violent. He paused. First time we've heard of him committing robbery. 3 months passed. The incident with Lewis gradually faded into my memory, becoming just another strange story to tell at parties. It was in February, during an especially harsh snowstorm, that I saw him again. Not in person, but in a small note in the local newspaper. Former professor found dead from exposure to cold. Lewis Grayson had been found in an alley near the campus. The article mentioned that he had only $30 on him, not enough for a night at the 15th Street shelter during the winter, when the rates increased to $40 due to high demand. $30. Exactly half of what I had carried that night. That afternoon, I visited the place where they had found his body. There was nothing special about it, just another cold alley in the city. But as I looked closer at the wall, I noticed something written in chalk, partially erased by the snow. Daniel B., half for me, half for the next. I froze, recalling how Lewis had taken my wallet with $60, but, strangely, had left my watch and keys. He hadn't spent all the money. He had saved half, not for himself, but for the next. The next day, I donated $30 to the 15th Street shelter. The staff member mentioned that Lewis used to bring people there, other homeless individuals. He found often paying out of his own pocket even when he barely had enough for himself. He was strange, the worker said. Sometimes aggressive, especially in recent months, but he never let anyone sleep out in the cold if he could help it. I left the shelter with a feeling I couldn't name. Lewis had robbed me, yes, he had scared me and hurt me, but in his final moments, freezing to death in a forgotten alley, he had followed some kind of personal code of ethics. I will never know if Lewis truly intended to help the next, or if that message on the wall was just the final delirium of a troubled mind. But since that unforgettable night, I've come to see the pleas of strangers differently, not just as threats or inconveniences, but as the cries of people fighting to remain visible in a world determined to ignore them. If you've enjoyed the video so far, leave a comment, give it a like, and subscribe. Let's move on to the final story. The last train arrived right on time at 11:40 p.m. James, exhausted after his shift at the gym, barely noticed the figure partially hidden behind a distant column. The head, completely wrapped in yellowed bandages, only caught his attention when, as he was leaving the station, he realized he was being followed. The nighttime rain intensified as James quickened his pace through the empty streets. A glance over his shoulder confirmed it. The bandaged man was following him with an unsettling determination. Even more disturbing, when their eyes met, James saw something in the stranger's gaze that made his blood run cold. Recognition. James. The voice, distorted by the bandages, sounded inhuman. I need to talk to you. How did that creature know his name? Panic detonated in his chest. James bolted into the night, slipping on the wet asphalt, eventually deciding to cut through a narrow alley. A mistake. His ankle twisted in a puddle and he fell, slamming his face against the wall. The bandaged figure now blocked the only exit. Finally, the voice said, "You dropped this." The man extended his hand, and it was James's wallet. Hesitant, James took it. "How do you know my name?" he asked, trying to control the tremor in his voice. A disturbing sound came from behind the bandages, something like laughter. "Your instructor badge with a photo, interesting." The man's hands lifted toward the bandages. "Want to see?" "See what?" "What happens when someone like you fails the test?" With deliberate movements, the man began to unravel the wrappings. Layer after layer fell onto the wet ground. James wanted to look away, but he was paralyzed. The face revealed was a patchwork of skin, unnaturally stretched over bone. One eye larger than the other, lips almost non-existent, exposing slightly pointed teeth in a disturbing smile. "Do you recognize your work, James?" Confusion mixed with horror. I don't know you. Not directly. But you know Michael Evans. You trained him for 6 months at Elite Fitness before the accident. A vague recognition hit James. Michael, a young man determined to transform his frail physique. The accident on the state highway? That was more than 3 years ago. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days, the man specified. He was driving to meet you. A special Saturday workout. He was excited, driving too fast. James turned pale. He vaguely remembered a client who had died in an accident, but he had never connected it to the extra training sessions he had suggested. I was in the passenger seat, the man continued. Fire. So much fire. The doctors say it was a miracle. They put me back together. So many surgeries I lost count. A quick movement and something metallic glinted in his hand, a small knife. And you never showed up. Not once at the hospital or the funeral. He admired you so much. I didn't know. I swear, it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is the test. What test? A test of humanity. The man stepped closer, the knife reflecting the dim light. When I lost my face, I lost my identity too. People see me as a monster. That's when I realized that true monstrosity is in the gaze, not in what is being seen. With the knife, he made a small cut on his own hand. Blood trickled down his deformed fingers. I started testing people, small gestures to see who could still see the human behind this mask. Most fail. James tried to step back. Please. You've already failed, James. Everyone fails. The question is, what happens next? The man put the knife away and extended his bloodied hand. Come with me. I have a place nearby we can talk then about Michael. With mortal reluctance, James accepted the help. Together, they limped out of the alley. The place was a basement apartment in what appeared to be an abandoned building. Surprisingly clean, almost clinical. On the walls, photos of dozens of people, some smiling, others visibly terrified. Gallery? The man explained. Everyone I've tested. James sat down as the man retrieved a first aid kit. Through a half-open door, James caught a glimpse of another room, various bandages of different colors hanging, and on the far wall, partially visible, an enlarged photograph of James standing in front of the gym. Why do I get the feeling that you already knew who I was long before tonight? James asked. The man grinned, his grotesque smile stretching unnaturally. Because you're special. It all started with you. The original test. He stood up and pulled something from a drawer, an old wallet burned along the edges. My brother's wallet, found in his charred clothing. He opened it, revealing a photo, Michael and James after a workout. You didn't just find me by chance, James realized. I've been following your routine for weeks. The 11:40 p.m. train, the street you always take. The wallet I found was deliberately placed for you. From another pocket, he pulled out a syringe. The final part of the test. It's not lethal, just transformative. The same cocktail that altered my mind during recovery. It lets you see others as they really are. James tried to stand, but his ankle wouldn't allow it. I don't want this. No one does, James. But we all need it. The man stepped closer with the syringe. After this, you'll see the world through my eyes. You'll feel the horror of being the monster. As the needle pierced his arm, James noticed something disturbing on the opposite wall. Among the photos in the gallery, there was a pattern. Some photos had a small red X in the corner, and next to those, tiny dates. With growing horror, he realized he wasn't the first to fail the test, and he wouldn't be the last. The drugs began distorting his perception. The last thing he saw clearly was the man unrolling a fresh set of clean bandages. Do you understand my test of humanity now, James? It's not about whether people accept monsters, it's about how we create new ones. 3 weeks later, a figure with a bandaged head was seen at the same train station, watching a man who regularly worked out at Elite Fitness. In his hand, he held a wallet that he would soon find lying on the ground. The cycle of the test continued. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. It really helps us bring more gripping stories to you. And before you go, Check out the recommended video we've selected just for you.